ACME would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways of Greater Melbourne, the people of the Kulin Nation, and recognise that ACME is located on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. Okay, welcome to talk number 2, Building Godzilla. I am, again, Sylvie Van Wall. So today we're talking all things to do with building and designing Godzilla. What makes Godzilla? We have Brendan Seals. Brendan is a visual effects supervisor at Luma Pictures and has worked in the film and commercial industry for 15 years. He was a VFX supervisor for Godzilla vs. Kong and has also supervised VFX for the latest Spider-Man trilogy, Jojo Rabbit and Alien Covenant, just to name a couple of little films that may have gone under the radar. And we have Kevin Smith. Kevin is originally from LA and is a visual effects supervisor for Weta FX, who supervised VFX on the highest grossing Godzilla film, Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire, as well as The Lord of the Rings, Avatar, Tintin, and Guardians of the Galaxy. Again, just a couple of indie films that maybe you've heard of them. And we have Sophia State. Sophia is an academic whose research into tokusatsu film and TV has taken them from Weta University in Japan to the University of Tasmania and even to Germany. So I'm going to open it up to the three of us, but we'll see if we can go in some sort of order. Also, I just want to mention, I'm kind of feeling like we're the three heads of King Ghidorah at the moment. And fun fact, one of the heads is actually called Kevin. Technically, it's Ichi-ni-san, 1, 2, 3, but San also gets called Kevin by the VFX designers. So there you go, fun fact. Yes, so, okay, can we maybe start with Brendan, and then we'll go around. What was your first introduction to Godzilla, and what impression did it make on you?
This is going to be so shameful in this sort of audience and this celebration,
but
you know what I'm going to say. Roland Emmerich's 98 film. Sorry, everyone, I'm sorry.
That's been the leading answer so far, so don't feel ashamed.
Oh, I'm going to carry it. I'm going to wear it. That hooked me, and very, very fortunate to then work on Vs. Kong, and then we later worked on X Kong as well. So great experiences at work as well.
Yeah, awesome. Maybe Sophia.
Yeah, actually, I was just racking my brains and I'm not sure. I think Godzilla is so pervasive in culture that it would be really hard to pinpoint the first encounter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay, I was going to say maybe there's one that left the biggest impression on you that comes to mind.
I think the most impactful one for me was Godzilla -01.
-1, yeah.
-1, sorry. That was such an emotionally powerful film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Kevin.
Well, I spent many an early Saturday morning as a kid watching Godzilla and Ultraman and all that kind of stuff. But professionally, not till Godzilla x Kong did I get to do anything Godzilla related at work.
Nice. So we are talking about 70 years of visual effects evolution here. It's going to be very hard to pack it down and condense it, but I will still try to keep things pretty balanced. Sophia, you're very knowledgeable in tokusatsu or suitmation. So maybe we'll start with that since it is the chronological way things went with Godzilla. What is suitmation? I have here a little fact that 7 different actors portrayed Godzilla in the suitmation style, so it's obviously a big deal. What is it and why is it important to Godzilla?
So suitmation is the technique of having someone inside a physical suit acting as the character. So in the case of Godzilla, that was a suit that was heavily made from latex, and that's where we get this idea of the rubber suit monster. But it's in, particularly with the first Godzilla film, it's in contradistinction to stop motion animation, and that's where the animation part comes from. So King Kong obviously was a stop motion feature, and that was originally kind of the aim for Godzilla, but it was too expensive and too time consuming. So the idea of having a person inside the suit became the alternative way of portraying the monster.
It is interesting that it was done because it was the cheaper way of doing things. I mean, it's to me that's not what I would have guessed instinctively, but I guess, you know, putting one guy in one rubber suit well, it saves money on clay at least for for stop motion.
I mean, it's much quicker. Obviously, stop motion is incredibly time consuming, but it also has the other advantage of it's quite hard to get smooth motion in stop motion, and you get issues with so things like explosions. It's quite hard to match the pyrotechnics that you would have to film with this kind of stop motion action. So I think we're all grateful that suitmation was chosen because it gave the option of having those miniature cities that I know we're going to talk about a little bit later, but the miniatures were able to be created at a much larger scale than they would have been for stop motion production.
Can you talk a little bit about the first rubber suit that was made? Because I was reading that it didn't actually have a zipper or anything, and it was quite hot in there. That doesn't sound very safe.
No, I think it's a miracle that the actors survived, particularly for some of the later stunts that involved them falling into water and things like that, where they had no way of getting outside the suits. So the original design was so heavy that it actually had to be scrapped and remade because the actor inside couldn't even move. But even after it was redesigned, it was still incredibly heavy. So he could only do a few minutes at a time because it would be so hot. And they talked about ladling buckets of sweat out of the suit in between takes, which is just not a very pleasant working environment from the sounds of things. But the other ways that they kind of got around it was by having some Godzilla feet that were separate from the whole suit. So for close-up scenes of buildings getting squished, that could be done without having to have the entire suit on. And then there was a hand puppet for close-ups on the face when they needed to have sort of more agile mouth movements and things like that. So there was a real mix of techniques so that he didn't have to be in that suit more than absolutely necessary.
Yeah, so much involved, and now we sort of associate Godzilla with CG and top-notch VFX. -1 won the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, but it was only really quite recently in Godzilla's history that things started to be totally CG. I think I'm just going to check my facts here, but I think 2014 Godzilla was the first one to be totally CG, and I think from 2004 there were CG elements in Godzilla films, but Godzilla was still a guy in a rubber suit, which is really fascinating because surely they had the money by then to do anything they wanted, and yet they kept it as a guy in a rubber suit. Why?
Are you asking me or
sorry. I realize you can't actually see me. This is not actually Sophia. This is the screen. Sophia, yes. Can you enlighten us why it became the go-to way to do Godzilla?
So, look, I'm going to preface my answer here with an apology to our fabulous special effects artists who do incredible work. But for me, there is something so special about the inhabitability of a physical world. The weight and the physics of it convey something that I don't think we're quite at the point where CGI is matching. And there is something so almost physically satisfying about the crunch of an actual person in a suit smashing stuff that is just, I think, irreplaceable.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Brendan and Kevin, you've heard the arguments. What's your defense?
It's interesting. I mean, I don't think it's a defense as it is. We would always prefer, and you generally hear all VFX soups say this, the more that can be done effectively in camera, the better our work will be, because we're only going to enhance and exaggerate from there. But the flip side of it is that the appetites of audiences for Western cinema, at least, is so grand that it's taking things to a point that are just not financially feasible. And often it's born out of that grandiose vision to do things that just can't have a shred of practicality to it. But from a personal standpoint, a guy in a suit's awesome. I mean, I grew up with Jabba the Hutt operated by 7 people inside that as well. So,
Famous,
and I love that. But the more that we can have in camera, the better for us, and it's an inspiration for us to work on if we can have that.
Yeah.
But not so much of a defense, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
But Kevin,
I'm perhaps unfairly setting it up as a battle, but it's not really.
I'll give you defense. People only notice what we do when it's bad. And there's a lot of stuff that goes by that's really great that you might not even notice or think is practical. But
Yes. Okay.
but when it comes to something like Godzilla, you can't. It just like you're saying, it can't be done. It can't be done practically. You can't make a movie even like Godzilla -1 or Godzilla X Kong without with miniatures. It's cost prohibitive, and you would not get the result you wanted.
Yes. And I imagine it would be quite difficult to do Shin Godzilla, where he has to evolve through all these different stages, to do that as tokusatsu. Yes. Oh, I did want to ask if the suitmation, you know, the rubber suits, influence the CG design of Godzilla at all? Is there, I don't know, is there like a manual or, you know, a Bible that you look at that says, you know, Godzilla has to be this and it has to invoke the suitmation?
There kind of
out the window?
It's more, there's less of a Bible and more like for us, I don't know how it was for you, but on Godzilla X Kong, we would final stuff and would go to the visual effect, the client supervisor would final it. It would go to the director and he'd be like, yes. And would go to Legendary and all the execs at Legendary would be like, this is great. And then they'd show it to Toho and they'd be like, nope. Nope, no, we're not doing that. And they're like, oh, okay. They're very protective. And like you asked the question before about like, why did the rubber suit last so long? Because those guys who own the intellectual property of Godzilla are super duper protective and want to make sure they curate what Godzilla is across all kinds of media to make sure that it stays what they want it to be.
Mm. Is there an example you can give of something that Toho said no to?
I think can I say this? I think I can.
I'm anticipating this one, Kevin. I'm watching. I'm waiting.
There's a shot in the kind of middle of the third act where Kong goes up to the pyramid. Kong goes back up to the surface to get Godzilla to bring him down to help, right? And they're almost like this meteor, and there's this big explosion when Kong and Godzilla crash in, and then they come right out at the camera, and Kong is kind of hanging off Godzilla, and they run and jump and meet the bad guys. And originally, I think there had been an idea that Kong was going to ride Godzilla out of that. And it was like, no one rides Godzilla. That's just not how that's going to go. So
I get that, yeah. Yeah, there's certainly an implication there of Kong being the US, you know, kaiju riding on Godzilla, the Japanese kaiju, and, you know, going back to what Godzilla represented in the first place. I can understand why they would say no to that. Like,
I feel like No One Rides Godzilla should be a t-shirt.
Oh, yes. No one rides Godzilla. Yeah, so suitmation is not the done thing now in modern Godzilla films, but it's still around, right, Sophia? Like, what are some modern examples of suitmation that we might have seen?
So one of my favorite recent ones is actually Weta Workshop's, what is it? I Am Mother. It was quite a small, well, maybe not a small film, it's on Netflix. And it has a character that's an android robot. It was an incredibly complex suit with hundreds of pieces that just creates a really sinister character. But probably one that people would be more familiar with would be the Demigorgon from Stranger Things.
Ah, yes.
Which is a suit. And that's an interesting example of Stranger Things because I think it shows how kind of arbitrary the lines can be. So the Demigorgon is widely referred to as being suitmation, but Vecna is described as being a person in prosthetic costume. Mm-hmm. And the line between those two things is so arbitrary, I think. There would be quite a few examples of prosthetic costumes that you could argue, I think quite convincingly, were actually suits.
Okay, yeah. That's so interesting. I didn't know about Stranger Things. I guess I would have probably thought it was just CG. Yeah, it goes to show how it has evolved to a point where you can't really tell anymore. Whereas what most people say about the early films as a way of deriding them is that, oh, it's just a guy in a rubber suit, you know? Oh, so corny.
Well, spoiler, Stranger Things, that was mostly almost 100% replaced
Okay.
with with CG.
In the later seasons, like the recent ones.
The guy in the suit, they shot a guy in a suit, and then they mostly replaced it.
Right. Okay. Oh, that's sad. I guess yeah. It's almost a little bit like motion capture then.
A little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, was motion capture used in the Godzilla Kong movies?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, well, maybe let's segue into that a little bit, and I'll come back to the suitmation. Mocap I find really, really interesting because you're getting that really human element to these creatures that are not human. So maybe, yeah, if you could talk about that, either of you, if you were involved with that at all. Yeah, how does that change how we view monsters on screen?
I'll start. I mean,
Go for it,
motion
yeah.
capture is used in all creature and character design work that we do because it's starting from something that has weight and physical presence. Even if you are going to augment it, slow it down, increase its scale, you are still starting from something real. And it can be as insignificant. I mentioned this to you before. We had, for example, with the fallout from the damage to the Apex facility, hundreds of civilians and victims of that disaster zone, and they were all motion captured crowd, and they're all performed by our crew.
Yeah.
So our crew are all the little people at Apex Pensacola, and you can even see some actual people that are really our crew amongst the tents there. So
They're going like, "Hi, Mom."
there's a couple of little Easter eggs in there if you were to pause, but I'll leave that for everyone else. But
You got 'em- you
yeah.
got that stuff through QC.
yes, got it past DJ. Yeah. So yeah, there's a few people on a stretcher with a certain decal on a shirt and things like that. So
Okay.
but you'd
So
have
get
to
your remotes out.
you'd
and
have to have
we'll
a
be
big
eagle-eyed.
TV for sure to pick that up. But yeah, motion capture is important in all aspects of creature and character work, and I'm sure Kevin will speak more to that as well with what he did in the film.
Yes, please, Kevin.
Yeah, we for us, Kong was almost entirely motion captured, based on pre-visualization done by the client. Godzilla's harder. Motion capture's come a long way lately in the last few years with being able to take a human onto a set and capture their performance for even, for example, like an ape, something where the limbs are different and the proportions of the body and the motion something do that like an animal would do, because we can, you can capture a human performing as a monkey, you can capture a human performing like we did. We captured Benedict Cumberbatch performing as Smaug in Lord of the Ring or in The Hobbit, even though the proportions of him have almost nothing to do with a dragon. And for Godzilla, a little bit of the same thing. There's a lot of shots where Godzilla is such a different physiology from a human. There's no point in capturing. We would just do hand animation. But there's sometimes when a character like that needs to really perform, it helps to just put a human being in the suit and get them on the stage and have them act out what they think that Godzilla might do. And even if the limb motion is wrong, when the animators look at that stuff later, you might notice like a little eye tick, or you might notice the way they move their head or twitch a finger, and it's all that little tiny stuff that they're like, okay, well, here's how Godzilla would move. And then, oh, remember that thing we saw in the mocap footage? I'm going to tweak his eye like that, or how his foot shifted, or any of that stuff. And you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get a really good animator kind of setting that performance up, and you also get what you don't get, or what you can only get on the mocap stage by just doing take and take and take and take, and having someone put their head into that character, just like the animator would do at his desk.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me, and I think in a way mocap definitely is the bridge between suitmation and CG, because it's keeping the human element. You've got a guy in a suit who can't express with his face, but he can express with everything else. And now you've got a totally CG creature, but the face is so human-like because it's been mapped from a real human face. Yeah, love that. So back to suitmation, Sophia. I talked a little bit about how people sort of look at it and deride it and say, you know, it's so cheesy because we can tell it's a guy in a suit. Do you agree with this assessment? And why or why not?
So I think that's kind of tapping into a broader question, if you don't mind me taking
Please,
it a
yes.
little bit, which is that we're very used to, in English-speaking countries, realism as the dominant form of representation in film and television, whereas that really is only one amongst a range of options. So, for example, a lot of Japanese media involves melodramatic acting styles, which in English-speaking countries we tend to associate with things like the bold and the beautiful, and so we describe that as being cheesy. It's over the top. It's too much.
And it comes from theatre, right?
There are, but even in film, there are a lot of different traditions that have, some of which have sort of died off in popularity. But I think for me, the suits are obviously suits in the older Godzilla films, but it kind of doesn't matter because it's representing an idea and it's just asking the audience to do a little bit more work to make that real to them. Whereas I think we can make stuff, I say we, I can't do anything. These fabulous people can make stuff that looks incredibly real. And that is great, but it also allows the audience to be a little bit lazy sometimes. And you were talking earlier about how we expect massive theatrical spectacles. And I think sometimes we get a little bit jaded. We expect everything to be turned up to 11 all of the time. And the beauty of the older practical effects, I think, is that it does make us do a little bit of work as the audience instead of putting all of that onto the filmmakers.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really think the design in the first film is so effective. You know, maybe it's the black and white that really sells it, but it's you know, it's quite, you know, kind of, it strikes fear into me, even though I know it's a guy in a rubber suit. I watched it again last night, and I was really quite taken with how effective it is. Can you speak at all to the design of the original suit? Like, how was it actually made, and you know, how does the guy get in it?
So the original design it's a bamboo frame with wire, and then it's kind of stuffed with polyethylene, I think, and then latex, like upholstery latex was poured over that. So it was very bulky and very heavy, and then there was a bunch of sort of cotton wadding that was stuffed inside to soak up the sweat and provide a bit of protection from all of those kind of sharp and hard things that the suit was made from. Then in terms of the design itself, it was meant to look very reptilian, but kind of in like an amphibious reptilian, so like a crocodile, turtle kind of appearance. So that's the kind of the skin texturing reflects that. But then the suit actor took a lot of inspiration from animals he observed at the zoo. So things like not lifting the feet up off the ground. So you never see the soles of Godzilla's feet lifting up as he's walking. And that came from observing how elephants moved, apparently. And then I particularly love in the original design the way that the hands are so ineffectual.
It's so tiny.
Yeah. I think it's a really endearing aspect of that original design.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just gonna open it up to everyone and ask: Do we agree on what sort of creature Godzilla is? I guess we know that he's a dinosaur. I think that's been you know, hit with a radioactive bomb and has turned into this monstrous creature. But you know, a lot of people say he's a lizard, and I don't think that's really hitting it on the head because he walks like a person or like a mammal. Do you have these thoughts while working on the modern films?
I mean, yeah, we have to, because we have to imbue these characteristics in the performance of the creature.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of debate though about which one it is.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's even as simple as saying it's a guy in a suit, and thinking about what they're bringing to that performance.
Yeah.
Because that is, as even Kevin mentioned, we have to owe to that legacy, and we have to respect 70 years of lore behind it.
Yeah.
lizard man, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I also know that the name Gojira originally is a portmanteau of gorira and kujira, so gorilla and whale. So not lizard at all. It's really saying gorilla, which is a creature that is bipedal and can be quite ferocious, and a whale, which is a gigantic thing that comes out of the ocean. So you marry those two things together, and that's Godzilla, plus the dinosaur element.
I always thought it was very iguana-like, especially when he swims with the tail.
Yes. Oh well, I think the iguanas are become the origin story in the Roland Emmerich one as well. I think it's radiated iguanas, not dinosaurs or sea creatures or anything. So yes, you're not the first one to say that. Yeah, so interesting. Okay, I've got so much to ask, and I'm really trying to cover everything. Let's talk about how much is practical versus how much is digital in the new film.
That's a big question.
Yeah, I know, and I know I said I wouldn't ask statistic questions, but maybe roughly, do you have an idea of?
Oh, I mean,
split?
you could probably even change the answer over the course of the last 10 years of the 4 Monsterverse films.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say Kevin's nodding, so he probably is saying the same thing. But I think with each one, it's been less and less practical and more CG. In X-Kong, the latest, 90% of our work was full CG. So every pixel on screen had, hundreds of people involved with crafting everything from props, destruction, the lighting of the creature, the animation of the creature, everything about it is crafted by hundreds of people, and not one part of it is actually practically captured. But yeah, I think it was probably something that started, big shots in Godzilla, the first one in 2014, with a lot of practical, and then over the course, at least from my viewing versus also knowledge of working on the latter two, it seems like we're probably at, I'd say at least 75% of the movies CG.
Yeah. Is that also true to your experience, Kevin?
Absolutely. I think the first Godzilla versus Kong, we didn't do a lot of shots, but maybe 200, 300 shots. And I think about 75% of them were just completely digital. Godzilla X Kong, I supervised 419 shots. 412 of them were completely digital.
Wow.
So literally, and the shots, the very, very few plates we had were basically taking a shot from the inside of a vehicle and us putting the world outside the vehicle. So it was basically 100% CG.
Yeah. It's funny, a lot of people say that in the suitmation days there was actual blood, sweat, and tears going into the films, and therefore there's more soul. But I can obviously see how there's blood, sweat,
Lots
and
of
tears on your
tears.
side too.
There's lots of tears. You just don't see us crying.
Yeah.
But yeah, hundreds of hours across hundreds of people across multiple continents for months and months and months.
Yeah.
And lots of passion.
Yeah. Was there anything in particular that gave you grief? Like, what's the thing that stands out? Like, this was the hardest thing to do.
I think it's more X-Kong for me, because a lot of the battle scenarios were much more fantastical than Versus Kong. In Versus Kong, it was things that were still grounded in city locations and recognizable landmarks, and then X-Kong kind of took it to areas that were completely fabricated, and of course Hollow Earth is something that no one's ever seen, so that I'm sure was a whole thing.
Yeah.
But Kevin will probably speak about that, but like you're talking about, progressively the scenario is getting more and more just completely imagined, and it's very, very difficult to tether it to things, and that's where our months of work go into, is trying to find real things in real life that we can bring to as inspiration, because we need it to be grounded in some way, otherwise it's just silliness at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It's still a little bonkers, honestly. It's the last one. But it's cool. I mean, to follow on to that, a lot of that too is a conscious decision by Adam Wingard, the director, to just forego a little bit the scale in Hollow Earth and just bring the cameras up to the monsters and treat them like actors and let them tell a story, and to just immerse the viewer in that story without worrying about well, Kong's moving too fast. How, something that big can't move so fast, and that's okay because at the end of the day, you're really just trying to tell a story.
Yeah. All of this is reminding me how important it is that we have that human element in art. Obviously, AI is a big thing that's threatening that now. God forbid, they ever try to make an AI Godzilla film, because I think you need that. Oh, I hope not. No, you need that, the human element always. That input is what makes it special, makes it real. On that note, let's now talk about the environments around Godzilla. And Sophia, this is also for you, because the way that they built things is very different to how it's done now, but still very important for Godzilla is the world around him, because he needs something to destroy. He also needs something to be destroyed by. So there's lots of tech, like little tech objects and sci-fi computers and spaceships in some of the the Showa era. So let's talk about how those environments are built. Maybe I'll start with the recent ones and then we'll work backwards. So, Brendan.
I mean, the scale of Godzilla means that the scale of the ancillary stuff that we do in visual effects becomes actually a primary component of the design of the film. So we often treat destruction as a secondary thing to the story, but destruction is a big part of Godzilla. I mean, that is Godzilla. A lot of our work on Verse Kong was the aftermath of probably what Kevin's company was doing. So we just had to we got given plates or photography of environments. They looked beautiful, and our job was to decimate them, destroy them. And so you've got artists handcrafting rebar and rocks and rubble and concrete, and they're making it all by hand, and then they're placing it in by hand, and they're designing it to look, was it a footprint that landed? Was it a tail that blew it out? There's a storytelling in just the design of the destruction. And that's a big part of Godzilla, and just hours just on that alone.
Yeah. Kevin?
For us, it was, both the latest two Godzilla Kong movies for us happened almost entirely in Hollow Earth. And for us is more trying to get, there's a lot of destruction, something that big can't even walk around without destroying stuff. But for us is mostly trying to come up with a reasonable analog of the real world that would allow the monsters to exist and to tell the story that the monsters want to tell, but still let the audience understand the world that they live in. So you need kind of trees that you recognize. You need kind of things that you instinctively understand the scale of. Because one of the things we found out on Godzilla versus Kong was we kept trying to change the height of Kong in some shots, and it turns out that you can't change the height of Kong. You need to change the height of a tree, and that's how you make Kong look bigger or smaller, is change all the trees, because
Shrink the trees,
you know how big a tree is. You don't know how big Kong is, but if you look at a scene, well, look, there's a tree. I understand in my monkey brain knows how big a tree is, so that's your brain tends to key off things it understands. And the other thing for us, I guess, really was just like, when you think about it, all that stuff in Hollow Earth, it's a cave. Like, all of this stuff happens in a cave. You're in a giant cave. We had to come up with a reasonable analog of outdoor lighting that you could have this kind of believable world that's interesting to tell a story in while you're in this giant cave, and have you feel like you're outside.
Yeah.
So.
I love that you mentioned having to shrink the trees instead of shrinking Kong, because that leads me perfectly back to Sophia with miniature sets built for the early films. So yeah, in the same on the same sort of theme, can you talk about the environments that were built for the suitmation films?
Yeah, so going way back to the 50s, as Brendan was saying, that it's all lovingly handmade. So you have Tokyo created it. I think that it was 1 to 25 ratio, and the detail that went into those sets was just incredible. So the buildings that were going to be destroyed had interiors, so that when they were smashed, you could see, someone's living room inside the building. So just an incredible amount of work and detail went into those sets that were then physically smashed. So you had to get the tape because you couldn't retake. It was destroyed, it was gone.
Yeah.
And there was, I think, one incident where a set was on sort of suspended on a platform and the whole platform collapsed. So they had to just kind of take as many frames as they could out of that to use them because they couldn't recreate the entire set after the platform collapsed. But there's some really creative use of materials, so things made out of wax, so they could be melted with heat lights and look like they were being destroyed by by Godzilla's beam and melt in a really realistic way. And the other thing I just wanted to mention, which is slightly off topic from your question, sorry, but
No, please.
just this idea that there has always been an interaction between practical effects and other ways of enhancing. So in that original film, the glow on Godzilla's fins and the beam were hand animated over the top of them.
I was going to ask, I was like, how did they do that? Because it looks very impressive.
We set it up at the start as like a bit of a versus, which is always fun. But I think, if we look at it in another way, they always have been complementary.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm so glad you said that. Yeah, because I was going to ask, do you know how they did the heat ray, which looks like it's maybe a smoke machine to me? I don't know if that's right, but...
so there were a lot of pyrotechnics, like a lot of small explosive charges used for the explosions. And then the glowing effect, I can't 100% answer whether the heat ray had smoke machines involved, but I know that it was hand animated.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's all, they literally would use an animation stand and project the plate on there and then paint and take a picture, and then the next frame and paint and take a picture. And they were doing that stuff until the 90s. Still, like, that was an effective way to get any kind, like lightsabers in Star Wars. Those were all hand painted at the beginning, and a lot of electricity effects or glow effects would always, the quickest way was just to have somebody paint it.
Yeah. Is rotoscope the right term?
Yes.
It is, okay. Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, back then, any time you projected onto your stand and then trace something out frame at a time was essentially rotoscoping. Now it just means drawing a line around stuff, but 100% that was roto,
yeah. We'll get to some audience questions in a bit. If you have something you want to ask and you want to submit it, there are QR codes on the sides, as like before. I wanted to ask, we talked about the things that gave you grief in the films, but let's flip it and maybe talk about your favorite scenes to work on, or maybe your favorite creature to animate.
All right, at Verscon, we got to design the maglev, form of travel to transport between the Apex facilities.
Oh yeah.
There was no concept or anything to start from. It was, we need to get from A to B, and there's a hangar that they stumble upon. They get somehow locked in the container and they shoot off to Hong Kong. Brendan, go. And I love that because that's, you don't often get that kind of brief where there's not much to start from, but we designed all of that, all the pulleys, the mechanisms, the lights, the fantastical justifications for how something could magnetically lift and transport, at 600 miles an hour. You try to rationalize it in your head with all your, knowledge of other things in vehicles. But that kind of design process, I love that. And I love that we left a mark on that. And then I really enjoyed working on Tiamat on XCOM. So there you go.
Nice. Kevin?
I 100% agree. When I was years ago, when I was a more junior supervisor or like a newer supervisor, I always thought, it's great when the client knows exactly what they want and they tell you and you do it, and that's pretty easy. But now I totally agree. Like, the best part is when you get you'll get work turned over to you and it's just we call it the dreaded picture of text, and there'll just be a spot in the sequencer that it's like a black frame with white text on it. It says this something happens, and that's great. Because you get to figure it out, and you know that the client trusts you to do heavy lifting in the creative process, and you get to like that is the best part when you get
We
to
become mini directors in that regard
a
because
little bit,
there's
yeah.
nothing to draw from, and you're bringing together your artists and your performers, motion capture, and you're trying to do something, as a group on yourself and pitch it back and present that.
Yeah. What about Godzilla taking a little nap in the Coliseum? Lots of
That's
people
so
love
good.
that. Yeah.
I wish that was my idea, but that's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Some audience questions have come through. A lot, actually. So, all right. Let's open this one up to everyone. Do you think suitmation will be used in a feature-length Godzilla film again, or has its time passed? We'll start with Sophia, maybe.
I think its time has passed. Having said that, though, even in Godzilla -1, while there was no suitmation, there were still a lot of practical effects. So I think my favorite example is all the scenes when they're on a ship and they're being blown around by the big waves and the wind. That's all just a bunch of actors going, okay, everyone lean left. And tilt tables were used to create some of those scenes of the ships bowling around in the ocean. So I think suitmation is gone, but I think practical effects will live on.
Mm-hmm. Do we agree? Over on the VFX side?
Yeah. I mean, as long as there's always I think also the safety on set has changed over the decades, and that's also been an implication on why things have transferred to CG so much. But I think the scale, like I said, the appetite of the audience and the scale that they're craving, it's the audience that's demanding the transition here.
Yeah.
We just service that.
Mm-hmm. Do you agree, Kevin? Or would you like to see it come back?
Absolutely. Because what we do is, well, it's really expensive. It's like, you're saying it's hundreds of people for hundreds of hours and like months. And I was on Godzilla X Kong for 2 years, that project. And when you have a lot of money to make your movie, it sometimes you get like, sloppy's not the right word, but you don't have to have everything completely planned out. And I think what you're saying about practical effects is 100% true, because you get it. The really interesting stuff happens in kind of mid to small budget movies where you've got limited money and you really have to have a plan. And when you have a plan and you have to think this stuff, how can I get guys on a ship going back and forth without doing it all CG? Well, there's ways to do it if you can have a plan and you plan out your whole shoot and shoot that, and you can, that the economy forces you to think more about what you're trying to do.
I think we're really attracted as an industry to the productions that can commit to something captured in camera, because it does speak to the plan. It speaks to the idea that whatever they capture is going to be in the film, which means they've meticulously planned it. And that will only benefit as we get further into the post-production process. So we love that.
Yeah. Because there is a bit of pushback on things being totally CG. And maybe that's only when it's, I guess, obvious or badly done.
Yeah, like Kevin said.
But obviously audiences kind of want to have it all, right? They want CG, but they want practical effects, and maybe there'll be a more even mix in the future, especially with -1 being so popular.
There's so much stuff, especially in a movie like this. Like, obviously Godzilla is CG, like, obviously, because there's no other way to do that. Obviously Kong is CG, and there's so many things you'll go to movie and see that go by you and you just accept at face value that are completely digital that you don't even notice, because there's a whole segment of work that we do is that we call invisible effects, and the whole point of putting Godzilla in the movie is that you're looking like it's right in your face, and we don't care if you really believe. The suspension of disbelief is not really the point, but there's a lot of stuff we do where it's like, if you didn't notice that we've done that, then that's how we know we did a good job.
Just out of interest, does anyone on the panel know how big Godzilla is exactly. I mean, yeah, Sophia, you might know the original height that they went for. Must be human height, right? Or
Top of my head, no. And I
okay.
know that, you know, there are so many different heights through the films. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I can tell you
interesting.
that in Godzilla versus Kong, Kong was 100 and pretty much exactly 100 meters tall, and then the Godzilla X Kong, they made him a little bigger, and he's about 112 meters tall.
Wow.
And we all, it's interesting, all the visual effects studios have to abide by that and match that. So there's a Bible, if you will, of that metric, and
Yeah.
we all have to all sanity check that he looks right, he's responding to lighting, and he's the same scale.
Yeah, that is interesting because I think in the Showa era certainly they weren't really abiding to that. He could sort of be whatever. Yeah. So there are more questions. So we just talked about the height of Godzilla and how important that is, but also his weight, his thickness, as someone's put here. How important is it for the look of Godzilla that he is thick? They've put in THICC. So, can anyone speak to that?
I mean, Kevin, it probably speaks to more just the muscle sim work that we have to do for creatures of this scale. Primary and secondary at this sort of scale. It's quite an endeavor to get that scale to work in visual effects. But yeah, I mean, we have to do obviously the animation, whether it's derived from motion capture or hand keyed. But then we have to do what we call muscle simulation work, where we actually under the layers of skin have got an anatomically correct for Godzilla, whatever that is, layers of muscle underneath that we have modeled. You can't see it and you'll never see it, but we have it underneath so that we can simulate the physics of the muscles, and whatever they do, of course, in conjunction with the bone anatomy, impress on the skin and the outer layer and how that slides over the top. Mm-hmm. So there is a consideration for how thick it is.
Yes. What about Godzilla's skeleton? Like,
It has a skeleton.
Yeah. What does that look like? Bizarre, I imagine.
Just kind of imagine there's a bone structure at every joint, just like us, and it has to be there to give the rigidity underneath, and we do that with all creature work. Yeah. Every creature's got a skeleton.
So are you building like every bone?
I mean, to a degree that it's needed. At a certain point, some bones are not going to affect the outcome of a muscle simulation. But yeah, we generally have a skeleton built for every creature. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Now I'm just like, I'm thinking so much about bones. I'm like, teeth. How many teeth does he have?
I don't know that one.
No, you don't know. You just sort of, put in all the fangs and hope it's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Sometimes, yeah. Hope for the best.
Good to know. So, what about the way that his design sort of, I guess, influences his role in the film? Because sometimes he's the antagonist, sometimes he's a protagonist or like an anti-hero. Is there much consideration into, the design in that? Like, do you have to make his eyes a bit bigger and more soulful or anything like that?
That starts to border on kind of creative decisions that are getting made way above my pay grade.
Sure, yeah.
That's like studio decision makings, and that filters down to you. There'll be shots where like, that you'll get notes from Adam like, oh, can you make his eyes bigger? Can I get this particular performance, as though you're directing an actor? And for us at that point, you're basically just like, yes, we can do that, and you do it. Like, you're just implementing that vision. There's not as many times, not very often, that you get to make a creative call at that high a level when you're talking about like the overall narrative arc of the story.
Back to Sophia. Is there a tokusatsu performance that's your favorite? And it doesn't have to be Godzilla. I know you're an expert in all things suitmation, so maybe talk a little bit more about the wide world of suitmation.
Yeah, so tokusatsu is just special effect, like practical special effects, so not only suitmation.
Okay,
But in terms of excuse me, so my my actual specialization is Kamen Rider, which is a children's superhero franchise in Japan. And that's still done mostly practically.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a lot of martial arts based work, so a lot of wires and stuff being filmed backwards so that the person looks like they're jumping a great height and things like that. And I find those kind of very old-fashioned techniques really endearing. They might not be as exciting as they were when they were first done 50 years ago for that franchise, but there's a certain kind of consistency to them I find quite charming. And if you don't mind me just jumping in on Godzilla's thickness.
Please, yeah.
I think there's something toddler-like about how bottom-heavy Godzilla is.
Yes.
And if you have spent much time around toddlers, they do spend a lot of time using their legs rather than their hands, often kind of crouching down and being quite destructive. And I think there's something kind of, you never know with toddlers if they're going to do something terrible or something really cute. And I think there's something of that about Godzilla as well. Sometimes it's just wanton destruction and sometimes it might be saving humanity, and you never really know what you're going to get.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And it's funny you bring up toddlers. Do you have thoughts on the son of Godzilla, Minilla? There's groans in the audience. don't mention Minilla. Maybe he could come back as CGI. I don't know if you know much about. Yeah, he's it's a very much derided film where it was, much more of like a kid-like take on Godzilla. So okay, well, I mean, gosh. Again, I'm going back and forth, and I feel like we're only scratching the surface of things. Let's have a look. Okay. So here's an easy one. Who would win in a fight, Godzilla or Kong?
I feel like Godzilla would win.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to evade the laser breath. I don't know. I don't know how Kong could escape that, really. I know he has.
Yes.
But only just.
Yeah. In real life, it wouldn't go down like that, is what you're saying. Yeah. Kevin, your thoughts on that?
Oh, well, that's the axe, right? He's got the axe. I don't know. It took both of them to beat Shimo, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sophia?
Look, I don't see why we have to set them up to fight.
Peace.
I know that's a cop-out answer, but and it's such an understandable desire to get two strong characters and pit them against each other. But for me, the thing that makes Godzilla a really powerful character is the complete inscrutability. We don't really understand why Godzilla does anything. And, we've been saying he for Godzilla, but of course we don't know if Godzilla is a he or she or an ancient horror.
True.
Those are the three genders. And that unknowingness is so important. And as soon as we get into things like, Godzilla and, I'm sorry guys, but fighting over who's the alpha titan, we're adding these kind of very human motivations that I think take something away from the character.
Mm-hmm.
That's my cop-out answer.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the US cops a lot of the blame for I guess making him more like a wrestler than a metaphor for Hiroshima. But they were doing that stuff in the Showa era as well in Japan. They were,
Absolutely.
cashing in on that and making him fight every other monster under the sun, including King Kong. And as I mentioned in the previous talk, he almost fought Frankenstein as well. So they weren't beyond doing really silly things, Yeah, or maybe that's something they didn't capitalize on soon enough. Maybe he should fight Frankenstein in the next movie.
I don't know if it'll do well.
Maybe not. Yeah, maybe Dracula, vampires in. Yeah.
But wasn't there a plan for a Godzilla versus Batman? Because
Batman. Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
That would be wild. Godzilla in the Matt Reeves Batman movies. You never know.
I was thinking Tim Burton, because Tim Burton famously said when he grew up he wanted to be inside the Godzilla suit. So Tim Burton's Batman versus Godzilla, I'd be down for.
That would be.
Well,
awesome.
you've seen Godzilla versus Bambi, right?
Yeah.
I'll Google that later. Thank me later.
We had a question in the last one. Who would you like to see Godzilla fight? So yeah, if you have thoughts on that, please. Who would you like to see Godzilla fight? It doesn't have to be a kaiju. Anything.
How about Rita from Power Rangers?
Okay. Yep. Love that. Kevin.
I have no idea. How about let's go aliens like xenomorphs.
Ooh. Okay. Yeah. Sophia.
I'm sorry, I'm really stuck on the Power Rangers idea now. That's brilliant. But I almost want the Power Rangers to fight Godzilla.
Yep. Nice. All right. Well, maybe we'll see that next, and maybe one of you will be working on the VFX for that.
Royalties, though. Just hear that right now. I just claimed that idea.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Your idea. Well, thank you, everyone. And if everyone could please thank Sophia, Kevin, and Brendan. Being so generous with their thoughts today. Thank you all for coming. We've got another half an hour break now before talking about Godzilla monster as metaphor. So go out into the world. Thank you.
Thank you.